I'm Suzanne Kingston. I'm the Executive Director of the New Brunswick Adoption Foundation. And our whole organization is around really promoting permanency for children, mostly in the foster care system, but certainly kids who've been adopted otherwise or who need families because they've lost their original family for whatever reason. So we have lots of families who adopt privately as well as internationally, and infant adoptions as well. And a lot of what we do is bring people together who have lived experience, because certainly people can learn from each other. I think that's where a lot of the best learning comes. We do also complement that though with people who have, who are professionals and have training and deep understanding in other ways as well, to come and be part of our community, and certainly our webinar presenters like Taryn, who's, a trained therapist. You can see all of her letters, BA, B.S.W, M.S.W, and R.S.W, but also is an adoptee, so really understands this on a very personal level as well. And that certainly from our perspective as part of the New Brunswick Adoption Foundation and our support network, that lived experience certainly, brings a lot of life to any learning, we provide through these venues. So thank you so much, Taryn. And Taryn's, I'll just do a quick intro as I've told you a little bit about her. Also, she runs Hills and Valleys counseling service. So it's really lovely that she's offered to do these sessions for us, and we really, really, really appreciate it. Just trying to think if there's anything else I need to just if you, obviously you're well, everybody's got the meet. The pandemic is over 3 years now, just over 3 years. So everybody knows to mute, and feel free to have your camera off and on, whatever's most comfortable for you. Speaker view tends to work well, as people already probably know. And we'll be going, we're just starting now. It'll be about an hour presentation. And then Q&A. So we should be all done by 9:30. And I'm going to just turn it over to Taryn.
Oh, thank you for that lovely introduction. I know most people will already have heard some of this before, and so I appreciate everybody joining in if you're returning. So I'll kind of skip over my experience for now, and I'll go back to it to talk more about my experience as a adoptee on a different level, as tonight we're going to be talking about grief and loss from a birth parent perspective. The previous weeks we did talk about an adoptive parent, and then the second week an adoptee, and those perspectives. So when we think about what a birth parent is, what I like to call a birth parent is you are the giver of life. So we will talk more about this as we go. But there's so many different circumstances surrounding placing a child or having a child removed. And we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about that tonight. So some of the common reasons for placing a child or a child being removed could be family pressures, birth parent unable to provide for the child or children, birth parent's age, and maybe it's not an appropriate time in life for the parent to be the caregiver. Maybe the pregnancy was not expected, and so being able to care for the child is not something that's in the plan for right now. Could be some trauma from the birth parent. So potentially whether it's from the birth itself or trauma that's created some mental health complexities, and that's creating difficulty to actually parent the child. And as I had mentioned, the child potentially being removed by CPS, Child Protective Services. That doesn't happen as commonly as it once did at one time. However, it is still a very real reality for many people. surrogacy and pre-planned, so something that has been planned going into pregnancy, and the developmental stage of the birth parent, depending on, the cognitive ability, their ability to follow through with being a parent. All of these things are just some basic reasons for placing a child for an adoption. So some relief of having a child placed or even removed is having a safe option for the child to be raised in an equipped home. And by equipped, I mean, I'm referring to whether it's mental health stability, hopefully, whether it's financial stability, having the resources to really provide a healthy, nurturing home for the child or the children. Sometimes there's an adoption or children being placed and it's more than one child. Sometimes it's siblings. Having the sense of pressure and responsibility lifted, if it's a chosen path that you're placing your child for an adoption, the pressure being relieved can be a really nice feeling at the time. Some common fears that birth parents can experience is the child not knowing about them as they age. And on the other hand, the child knowing about them, because sometimes birth parents actually don't want the child to know anything about them. They want it to be very anonymous. They want their privacy to be respected, and they want to leave that chapter where it is and move forward with their life. Potential fear of being judged by family or by peers. Worrying about, will I regret this decision? Or what if I made the wrong choice? Down the road, having those fears that could happen. Having the child placed in an abusive home. So that goes along with what if I make this decision, or what if my child was taken from me and the home that they're going to is actually turns out not to be so safe? And am I going to feel guilty because of that? Worrying about having other children. Will you be able to have another child and have a nice, healthy bond with that child? Maybe you have some guilt around placing a former child, and so worrying about having another one can be on your mind. Fear of being alone. So if you place a child or a child is taken from you, sometimes there is that very common fear of, am I going to be on my own? Will I be loved? Fear of disappointing others. Maybe there's pressure from people in the family that want you to keep your child. Or if you have your child removed, there's that fear of, am I letting my family down because they're seeing me as a failure? Not having any updates about the child, not knowing how they're progressing and how they're developing and things like that. And worrying about becoming pregnant really soon after is another fear. So some mixed emotions that can often happen. So some birth parents can experience, like I said, that sense of relief and comfort in placing a child for an adoption, while others can actually experience dread and remorse after it's happened. Many birth parents do experience that extra level of loss if the child was removed by CPS or other means. And so it is normal to go through these stages of emotions. However, a child is removed, whether it's by choice or by force. So it's really important to recognize that these are common feelings and they're actually very healthy to have. The impact of separating from a biological child. Even if placing the child is a planned event, you can't always predict how you're going to feel after this choice. Every individual is going to respond differently, and it's unfortunately not something that you can forecast. So not only will you respond differently, but you will also process it differently than maybe someone else that you know that has gone through a similar experience. So I always encourage people to do as much research as you can on that biological side of things, the birth process and how that impacts your body and how it impacts your hormone levels and what mental health situation may follow after giving birth. Not only from a female perspective, a biological female giving birth, but the partner as well, and how the partner is impacted by this decision or this force of decision. Some grief and loss throughout life that birth parents often experience. Again, grief can be a very random and sporadic thing, triggered by different events at different points in your life. And different stages of life can trigger those different emotions depending what's going on. Grief can also linger without giving you any real notice. It's different for everyone, and it can be felt on many levels in life. Depending on the circumstances surrounding the child being placed with another family or even an agency, so like in foster care, for example. And some of the stages of grief that we talked about each week as a reminder: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And it's important to recognize the stages of grief and how it applies to adoption, because these are the basic emotions that people will go through and experiences. Some signs that grief may be present for you or someone you know and misinterpreted as something else could be anxiety. And again, these signs don't only apply to the person who gave birth, but also to the partner who could be impacted at the same time. There's not always that incidence where there's going to be the partner, but it could certainly transfer over to a family member, even who's aware of the situation. It can be something that's shared amongst several people in the situation. So what it can often look like, as I say, is anxiety, sensitive to external stimuli. So it could be sounds, feelings, sensations, things on the radio, replaying scenarios in your mind, having outbursts of aggressive behavior potentially and lashing out, sleeping too much or not enough. That is another really common sign. So if you're noticing changes in your sleeping patterns, that's something to be mindful of. Where is that coming from? When did this start? And why? Being overly confident or projecting, self-harm or suicidal ideation, or even attempting. Now, self-harm does not always mean that suicidal ideation or thoughts are present. In fact, they are quite different. A lot of times people will think that if you self-harm, then you automatically have suicidal thoughts or potentially may want to attempt to end your life, but that's not always the case. So it's important that even if you have the self-harm behaviors, that it's good to just kind of keep record of where your thoughts are. Having self-criticism, fear of abandonment, bouts of crying, reassurance seeking, appetite changes. So it could be eating too much or not enough or at all. Maybe you're binging. Some people will purge. Just depends on how you react to stress. And of course, substance use or abuse. Could even be immersing yourself in other types of addictive behaviors like gambling or being over sexualized. So there's different forms of addictive behavior as well. And before I go on, I noticed there's some comments in the chat. Is there any questions at this time?
There was a question around the handouts, so we will be sending these out to everyone. There was a comment when you were talking about others feeling, beyond the birth mother, the partners, and then I added the extended family tends to also, grandparents may feel like we should have been there for this child too, right? So that, just adding that comment. But I think we're okay for questions right now.
Okay,
but
great.
yeah, feel free to jump in though, everyone.
Absolutely.
I did have one little question.
Sure.
When you're talking about the stages, can you talk a little bit about the order and that, is it always in that order,
No, it's actually, it varies. So when I say like the stages of grief, it doesn't mean that just because they're listed in that way, that that's how you're going to feel them or experience them. A lot of people tend to actually jump around quite often, from whether it's denial all the way to depression, to anger, to acceptance. So it just depends on what's going on in the person's life most of the time, and how they are managing their stress levels. If there's an incidence of loss where the person hasn't allowed themselves the proper time and acknowledgement to really process what's gone on, then you're more likely to see yourself jumping around at different stages. Whereas if you've actually given yourself some time, they say about 6 to 8 weeks is an appropriate time to really let things sink in. And then following that time, if things aren't resolving naturally over the next few months, then you're looking more at going into that, what we call complex grief stage. And then you tend to see a lot of that jumping around and lingering. So it just really depends, like I say, what's going on in one's life. So some of the triggers at different points in your life, again, very normal. Pre-birth. So when someone's pregnant with the child and you're starting to think about potentially placing the child for adoption, or perhaps know that maybe CPS will become involved, because a lot of times there is warning around that, and you can sense that that might be coming. Not always, but sometimes. Some things that can be very triggering are just natural experiences. Like the process of being pregnant in itself can be very triggering. Knowing that you're feeling the sensations in your body, your brain is telling you one thing, your heart might be telling you something else, and you're just trying to find that healthy balance of what is best for me, what's best for this child, and hoping to come to a resolution for yourself and the baby. And also your environment and people and what's around you. What are people saying about the pregnancy? What are people saying to you about the pregnancy? And how are you internalizing that? Do you have support, or most people in your life being more judgmental toward you in this situation? Objects can be very triggering. So for example, if you go to the mall and you're going for something totally different than um, something child related and you see a can of baby food, that can be very triggering while you're, pre-birth stage, knowing what's coming next. Certain sense. So sometimes that can be simply part of being pregnant and that being a very natural reaction hormonally, or just something reminds you of the up and coming decision that's going to be taking place. Certain noises, for example, a baby crying even on TV, that can be triggering, to the wind blowing a certain way and you not knowing why it's causing you anxiety. It can be something that you think is relevant and something that you may not is relevant at all, but just being aware of your surroundings is really important. During birth, so attachment, it becomes real when you actually deliver the baby and know that, okay, now my body has fully gone through this process. Everything that I thought was going to happen with the decision that I have to make, or, maybe the child is being removed forcefully, it becomes real because that person, that little baby, is no longer in the tummy, right? Like he's out in the real world. So dealing with that reality, along with hormonal changes in the body and your sexuality, has a huge impact on how you may feel. Again, these are not things that one can predict. You can try and do your best. And women who are planning even have birthing plans, but they don't always go as you ideally would hope that they do. Family dynamics. What are family dynamics like at the time of the birth? And how is that impacting you and your journey? How open a communication is. Are you able to actually talk about or communicate how you're feeling and the things that you're going through at the time? Curiosity of the child's well-being and wondering and worrying where that child's going. Sometimes right from birth, the child is immediately removed, whether they're being adopted or by force. So both scenarios, sometimes that window of bonding is very short, and that's for a purpose. But that certainly can be very triggering without warning. Social media. So seeing other people on social media posting things, or just coming across various things during the time. Life decisions and experiences. Again, where the decisions you're making, how is that impacting how you're experiencing the world around you? And what's your physical recovery like? Is it an easy delivery? Is it an easy transition back into your regular life? Or is there complications and now it's becoming even more of a challenge to let go potentially? And then post-birth. So life transitions, different points in life are going to potentially trigger the thoughts of the what if, or, wondering how things are with that child that you gave birth to, or the child that was placed in the family. So again, whether it's a grandparent or a friend or the partner, goals, are your life goals being met or not? And are you comparing your goals being met now to what could have or would have been if you would have kept the child in your care? So comparing things. Lingering questions about the child, wondering, how they are and what kind of family they grew up in and life they had. Potentially thinking about having other children. Some people do express, am I worthy to have another child? Is it fair to have another child? And absolutely, yes, it is. And yes, you are worthy. However, these thoughts are very normal and their natural reactions to having a child removed from your care. Coping skills. What are your coping skills like? So are you someone that is coping pretty healthy, or are you not getting enough sleep? And are you using things like food to cope with stress? Are you using substances? What's your coping like? And is culture a part of your life? Are you connecting with that side of yourself? Because sometimes culture can actually be quite healing, as we talked about last week with adoptees, and making sure that they're really connected to their roots. Do you have supports in place or not? And social media and television, again, can be really triggering for a lot of different reasons. So my experience as an adoptee, in terms of what it was like seeing my birth family when I was of age. So I was about 18, in early childhood. So I talked a little bit about this last week, but I want to look at it from a different perspective this week. How I understood my birth family when I was growing up was interesting, because I was always told that I was adopted. So it was never a secret. And as I got older, I learned more about what happened, what my story was. And I was always told that my birth mother, this was not a decision that she took lightly. She really didn't like the decision that she had to make. She had a couple of children before me that she did actually keep. And due to circumstances in her life at the time, she was not able to keep me. And then after, she actually did end up having another child and kept them. So it was a bit unique for me to learn those things. And I didn't learn those things until I was older. But when I was young, my understanding was always that I had this other family out there somewhere, and they wanted to know more about me. They worried about me. And one day I might be able to actually meet these people. And when I was in my adolescence age, more information came to me about my birth mom's circumstances, about not knowing much about my birth father, and that being part of the reason why I was not able to be kept. So as time went on, more and more information came out for me. And the more that I learned, the more I wanted to share and understand from my birth mother's side of things. And when I went into adulthood, I was able to actually meet my birth family. And when I say adulthood, I mean like older adolescence. I was probably about 18. So I was still young enough cognitively and developmentally, but old enough that I was able to handle, or so I thought, as much as I could, that situation. So when I met with my birth mom, she was very open with me about her experience and the grief that she felt following that decision that she had to make. And it was something that kept her kind of stuck in life. She went through all of those stages of grief over and over in her life. And it was something that always made me feel pretty awful, honestly. It made me feel really bad, because from my perspective, I had only ever thought of her as kind of my hero, because she made this decision that was so selfless. And here she was struggling all of these years, wondering about me, feeling guilty, feeling remorseful. And here I am with this really lovely family that, always wanted the best for me. I had a really great and secure upbringing. I had my own experience with grief my adoptive family had their own experience with grief, and my birth mom had her own. So it was interesting to see it all come full circle. And when I finally was able to speak with her as an adult, probably in my mid-20s, I was able to understand more of the impact that grief had played in her life. And even today, my appreciation for birth parents is just so great, because it takes a very selfless person to make this decision. Even somebody who has their children removed, somewhere deep inside, there might be that sense that this this may be the best situation, the best scenario for this child, even though it hurts, even though that's a part of you that you feel is missing. That child deserves to have that security, that stability. And if you're not able to provide it at the time, as tough as it is, it doesn't mean that that story, that chapter's over forever. It might just be a short time to have the child have some stability. You can get some support for yourself, and eventually, who knows, your paths may cross yet again. And that's kind of how I like to see it now. Is my birth mother really was struggling, and she was not able to care for me at the time, yet we always knew in our, like, deep down somehow, that there was going to be a reunion. And even at the time when I had met her, she had made the statement, "Oh, it just feels like you had been on vacation for all of these years." So for her, and for a lot of birth parents, time actually ends up halting and stopping. And you're kind of reliving in that stage of grief sometimes if you don't allow yourself to really process and heal. So I thought that that experience was really eye-opening for me. And I was able to see outside of my own grief and my own process, and see it from hers.
Yeah. I have a question actually for me that I thought people may have is, was there anything that your adoptive parents did that helped you, that helped make that experience of witnessing your birth mother grieving, right? And also, meeting her and all of the complexities of that. So, because I think most people here in the group are adoptive parents. So what can they do to help their adoptive kids navigate through that
Yeah.
that your parents did to help you get to the point where you are?
That's a good question. And it's so different for every child. For me, what really helped was that and as most adoptees, you feel a sense of loyalty to your adoptive parents. And you feel guilty when you want to reach out to the birth family. So to have that blessing and that support, that open line of communication with my adoptive family was really, really critical. Now, I can't say that both of my adoptive parents were as open. I tend to be more of, you go to one to talk about these things rather than two, because sometimes it is harder for one parent, again, both different parts of their grief, to acknowledge that the adoption was a thing, especially from the 80s. So things are a little more open now, and having that open communication and really supporting the child in exploring. And for adoptive parents, it can be really scary, because you feel like you've put in all of this time and love, and your heart is really with this child, and you're their parents. And so you fear that if you open that door and they meet their birth family, that they're going to choose that side over you, when in reality, they will most definitely, in almost all cases that I've seen, at some point, if not right away, will come back, because you're their stability, you're their constant, and there's always room for more. Like, the birth side they bring to the table a different part of that child, that person who's evolving. They need to learn where they've come from. They need to learn what their background is. And so it's really important to allow them that experience, because otherwise, they might build up that resentment of feeling like it's not fair, and going through their stages of grief even more. So it's a tough balance, but it's really important that they feel they can be open with you about that.
Right. Great. Thanks.
So some of the triggers that impact our quality of life and healing. And as a reminder, I just like to put for birth parents, you are never forgotten. If a child knows about you and knows you're out there, you're never forgotten, no matter what the circumstances, whether there was abuse in the home, whether it was a decision you made for out of the goodness of your heart. Either way, you are never forgotten. It's normal for a birth parent to experience trauma from this. We don't always recognize it, because it's something, even if you feel like you've made the right decision, it can still come back and trigger you. It can be traumatic to give birth for many women to begin with. So to even have that experience, if you were the birth parent to give birth, that natural trauma for a lot of women. Adoptive family and child feel it too. So we don't always know the other side. That's kind of the interesting part about adoption and fostering, is you don't get to see all of the other sides. We only see our own little world a lot of the time. So it's really nice to be able to take a step back and reflect on all angles, especially for the child as they age. Sometimes we are stuck in our own feelings, and we don't always know how to get back into the world around us. So it's important to validate. And again, remember that you are never forgotten if you're a birth parent listening tonight. Be open. So like we talked about last week, communication is really key, and it should be done in a way that you can relate to and understand, depending on your development and cognitive ability. Acknowledging the pain, that really is the first step of healing. It's to recognize that you're in pain, you're experiencing it, and allow yourself to really feel that emotion. Because if you stuff it down, the more that you stuff it down, the more it's just going to try to creep its way back up and come out in different parts of your life that you don't want it to. And usually at times when you definitely don't want it to. So it's important to at least acknowledge that it's there. Using the skills that you have. So finding ways of releasing stress and pain without inflicting more pain and suffering onto yourself. So instead of doing things like self-harm or overusing substances or addictions in other forms like sex or gambling, eating disorders, another form of addiction, right? Like there's so many different things that we can do to release stress. Considering the facts. So considering the facts around the adoption as a birth family can be really helpful to put things into perspective and thinking about the current situation that you're in. So maybe when you gave birth, or maybe when you were aware that the child that you are a biological family member to came into the world, maybe you were in a place that you weren't even able to finish school, and maybe now you have been able to. So looking back and seeing how far you've come. Release the emotions, finding ways to connect with nature, exercise, loved ones. So basically finding those healthy outlets to ground your sense of self. Remembering your worth. You did give the gift of life, or maybe you were part of giving the gift of life to another human. And then you also gifted a new addition to hopeful parents and family members. So keeping that in mind sometimes can help to alleviate some of the pain that you might be feeling. And keep adding to your life story. So just like adoptees, you can actually build yourself a timeline and keep track of your life events. And it can help to show how resilient you really are. Find a support network like this of others who may have been there. You're not alone, absolutely not alone. And you are worthy of finding that peace with your situation and building that community that can help you in your healing journey. Sometimes we tend to suffer in silence and we isolate ourselves. And, you know, in the age that we're in, social media and technology, there's always ways to find others to connect with. And finding healthy ways to do that can be really helpful. Using your coping skills again, so finding ways to self-soothe your five senses, whether it's your scent, sight, taste, touch, hearing. And giving a bit of time to open it up for some questions.
Hi, thanks so much. I just want to thank you very much for this fantastic presentation. I'm going to just turn off the recording in just a minute, but before that, just so for the recording purposes, I just wanted to say thank you so much. You know, for the rest of the group, you know, in a minute, just to turn on your camera, turn on your screens, and it might be nice to just have a bit of a discussion around this. It's a pretty complicated experience to have been part of a biological family in these circumstances. So feel free to, you know, talk with Taryn about all the different complexities that could be. And thank you so much. And I just want to say thanks for this is third session for those watching via video. Thanks so much. We got through 3 sessions. It was very in-depth. Thank you so much.